Got to be careful with that. We don't want another Ed Jai incident. My name is Joel. For those of you who don't know, I'm a member of this church, and I'm grateful to be here. So, are we ready? We're going to do something. We're going to do word association, and probably you've done this before. I say a word or a phrase, and you grab onto the first thing that comes into your mind. Now, normally when you do this, you shout it out, but we don't want that. We don't want that, and I'll explain why. Whatever pops into your mind, I want you to grab onto that. Savor it, hold on to it, because we're going to come back to it later. Now, the fun thing about this game is how it shows us who we are. So the very simple one would be, I say dark and you think light. Or you might say sheet and I think cake. Now some people are going, no. You say sheet and you're supposed to think blanket. But no, I think cake. That says something about me, doesn't it? It says something about me. It's a marvelous exercise because it reveals to us how our brains work, our values, and even our worldviews, and it shows us that sometimes something that is really obvious to one person isn't obvious at all to someone else. The first thing that comes into our mind might be determined by something as benign as what we ate for breakfast. Or it might be determined by our practices and how we live our lives and what we rehearse. And therapists love this game. They just love it because most of us censor our first thought. We do. So if you say Italy, I think Sophia Loren. But I don't really want the whole world to know. I don't want the world to know that. I don't want the world to know that if you say Italy, I think Sophia Loren. So I wait just a millisecond and I come up with something else. Pasta, olive oil, the Vatican. So you can see how if we really want to be transparent with one another, this is a great game because it shows us the stuff that we want to hide. Now we could really spend a lot of time on this because it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to have boundaries. Maybe I should put up a boundary about what I think about Italy, but it's too late. So we're going to come back to that later. We're going to, very briefly, we're going to talk about boundaries later, but just think about what we hide from the world. So we're going to play the silent version because I don't want you worried about what other people are going to think. I want you to consider what you think. So again, I'm going to say this word, and whatever comes into your mind, your first response, I want you to hold on to it and, sort of rub it up a little bit and put it right there. And I want you to work on it the whole week, honestly. What comes into your mind when you hear the word pastor? Now, some of you heard the word pastor and you immediately thought of those lamb burritos over at Alfaro. Pastor. Some of you, it wasn't a word or idea, it was a person. So the first person I think of when I hear the word pastor is my pastor, Dwayne Adamson. He hasn't been my pastor for 40 years. 40 years. But when I hear the word pastor, I think, Dwayne Adamson. And my whole heart comes alive. So I wonder, but maybe some of you had to stifle a little grimace Maybe some of you don't actually have a positive association with the word pastor. I don't know. It's okay. Listen to that, though. We need to listen to that, and we need to consider that our first association isn't somebody else's. Because a lot of times we think we're talking about the same thing, and we're really not. We aren't. Say pastor, and I have positive thoughts. Not everybody does. So, a couple of months ago, or maybe, I don't know how long, I forget when it was. Al visits me, and Al says, hey Joel, how about if you bring a message? And I thought, oh, that's kind of an honor. And then my heart starts pattering, fluttering a little bit. And then I said, well, yeah, I'm open to that. And then Al gives me this assignment. And Al's assignment is, Joel, could you just summarize everything we've covered up to this point? I'm not making that up. Now, let's agree. Al has been very clear. Al has focused on discipleship. And to help us come along, he gave us 7 paths to discipleship. On January 22nd, I went back and went over all my notes. On January 22nd, he told us Al's 7 paths towards discipleship are worship. Okay, Lisa's helping us with that. Our wisdom, community. We're working on community. Peculiarity, we have that one down. Holiness, mission, and reproduction. Those were Al's 7 paths. But I can't summarize up everything he said because he said a lot of really, really good stuff. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how Al is leading us on that path. And in what capacity? Al is leading us as our pastor. Now this might be very interesting. The word shepherd is in the Bible all over the place. You can't kick over a log without a shepherd climbing out in the Bible. But the word pastor, as pastor, the way we think of it, it's actually only in the Bible once, one time. Kind of surprising. It's in that Ephesians 4 passage. The gifts that he gave were that some would be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, so that all may attain the knowledge of the Son of God, maturity, the full stature. So in Ephesians, pastors are just part of this whole crew of people that are serving the church. So there's apostles. We know who those guys were. We're going to go back to them in a minute. Prophets. So I thought about, who do we know that's a prophet? And I thought, well, Russell Jung. I'm going to give you another one. Think about it. Amy Lee. Amy Lee's a prophet, in my opinion. Then there's evangelists. Evangelist brings good news. Who brings good news? Cindy Jew. Cindy Jew brings good news. And then it sort of lumps pastors and teachers together. Pastors and teachers. It's rough, Al, sorry. Fortunately, you sort of fit into those other categories too. Clearly, in John, we have Jesus calling Peter to pastor, to shepherd people. And what we see in John is how Jesus' call to Peter illuminated not just the paths that Al is trying to lead us to, but the way he's been doing it. So John 21, I just think this is a magical story. It's just gravy, isn't it? So it's set after the resurrection, but it still kind of feels like a Lent story. Think about it. Jesus has been raised from the dead, but then he keeps disappearing. Like, seriously, he goes away, he disappears. They don't know where he is. Like, could he have office hours so we would know where he is? But the disciples are left high and dry. It's like, what are we going to do? Where is Jesus? They don't know. They have no idea where Jesus is. So, and this is bonus today. This is a bonus thing. The disciples are just like the rest of us. In times of crisis, they go into a default setting. And the disciples' default setting is fishing. Don't know what to do? Well, let's go fishing. This is Albert's favorite verse. So I just want us to also think about our own default setting. Where do we go to without even thinking about it in times of crisis? Do we get angry and kick walls? Do we watch Netflix and eat Ben and Jerry's? I do all three of those things. Four things. In times of crisis, I do those things. That's what I do. I do both. By default, when in crisis, let's try to choose how we're responding, not just go into default. So the disciples, they don't know where Jesus is. Let's go fishing. They're out there fishing, and then there's this guy sitting on the beach. They see a charcoal fire. There's fish on it and bread. Jesus says to them, come, have breakfast. And nobody asks because they know that it's Jesus. Now, on the beach, broiled fish for breakfast. We Christians are so very odd. There's one verse in the whole Bible about handling snakes. There's a whole denomination built around that. I guarantee you, if we started a church that did a fish fry on the beach, so many people would come. Why has nobody done that? It's in the Bible. Jesus did it. I don't know. Is God calling us to that? I don't know. 153 fish, Albert can do that. He's done that. So, the story continues. Sorry, that was a sidetrack. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, what's he talking about? Is he talking about the other guys? Is he talking about the bread? But he says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. A second time he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know it. So tend my sheep is how Jesus responds to that. And then he says it a third time, and the Bible tells us, Peter's feelings were hurt. So Peter says, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Now, remember, all the other disciples were there. John, he's the one who wrote this. He's there. Nathaniel's there. Matthew's there. Everybody's there. Can you imagine being Matthew and suddenly you're having to learn how to fish? You didn't know how to fish. Just watch everybody else. In the story, Jesus focuses just on Peter in front of everyone else. Jesus tells Peter, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. We can make up a lot around the symbolism, the difference between lambs and sheep, the symbolism of 3 commands. Maybe Jesus has to repeat the command because he knows we're all kind of slow, clueless. Sheep are clueless. Sheep need help. But the big thing is Peter had just denied Jesus 3 times. 3 times. And so the whole time, Jesus is modeling pastoring for us. This is what a pastor does. A pastor doesn't just provide his disciples with breakfast, which Al has been initiating a little bit here, but he focuses in on the person that he knows is the most at risk, the most discouraged, who needs to be reconciled. So in the same way that Peter's denials were public, Jesus publicly reconciles Peter to himself. This is really powerful stuff. And notice that this is actually kind of the heaviest part of all. Jesus' response to Peter's denial isn't penance. It's not pillory. It's not public disgrace. The shepherd, what he wants Peter to do is to serve. The guy that betrayed me, okay, feed my sheep. He reaches out and draws near somebody that maybe the rest of us would have said, okay, Peter, go take a time out. We'll get back to you when we need you. So just let this soak in a little bit, and let it soak in that we're called sheep. Most of us haven't grown up around sheep. When I was a kid, there was a sheep farm ranch down the road, and I've also known some people who've lived in Utah. Sheep are really not very smart, and we think more highly of ourselves than maybe we should if Jesus is calling us sheep. Al gave us 7 paths. 7 paths. But underneath that, we're sheep. We're sheep who need to be tended and fed. So I stole this line from a friend of mine, Shayla Sloper, but she said to me last week, many of us think that being a Christian is like walking a tightrope. I thought I'd add a little bit of drama here. See if I can actually do it. We think that being a Christian is like walking a tightrope, and we're terrified. We're afraid we're going to fall one way or the other, and we're like, but that's not true. That isn't true. What is true is that the world is a pasture, and we have a loving shepherd who wants us safe and fed and well. There are wolves, there is drought, you do need to know where the stream is, but we have a loving shepherd who wants to guide us back, who wants to bring us to fresh streams and green grass. So the real question is do we believe this story? Can we believe this story? Can we believe that whatever our betrayals, whatever our mistakes, whatever our weaknesses, whatever our infirmities, can we believe that Jesus still cares for us? And not only does Jesus care for us, but he has a call for us. Jesus' call isn't for us to be humiliated. It is to serve. So what does it mean to hear that? What does it mean to us? Have I failed? Yeah. Have I hurt someone? Okay, apologize. Make restitution. Be reconciled if at all possible. But don't just stay there. We show the genuineness of our contrition Not by making apologies over and over again, rehearsing our shame, but by believing that we've been called to be shepherds and to be shepherded. We're sheep. God will lead us. God has also given us sheep. If we don't know who they are, well, maybe we need to pray about that, because God has given you some sheep. Every single one. Every single one. And God has given us a pastor. God has given us a pastor. So, we're going to talk about Al. I'm going to not make eye contact while I do it all. What have we learned about Al? Well, Al loves big hair. Remember that picture of Al? Big hair. He has an affinity with Ron Lee in that respect. If I was at all technologically savvy, I would have juxtaposed Al's big hair picture with that picture of Ron Lee surfing with the big hair. Another thing we know about Al is not only does he know people named Ralph, he listens to them. Al listened to a guy named Ralph. I don't even know anybody named Ralph, let alone do I listen to them. Al knows people named Ralph, and he listens. Another thing we learned about Al is he really likes to hike. His ongoing picture for us is one of journey. He visits this almost every week. Al likes to hike so much he doesn't even care where he's going. Al preached a sermon about the discipleship road. The next week he talked about putting on our backpack and the stuff that we stick in it. The symbolism of a pilgrimage trail is real to Al because that's one of the places where Al lives, and it's where he wants us to live. Where he wants us to live. Al wants us on that road. So another thing that Al wants to do is he wants to break down the walls that separate Christians. Because Al knows that every Christian is on a journey, he knows that we're all at different places, coming from different places, and that God is leading us, but the trails are a little bit different from one person to the next. So he wants us to focus on the journey more than on what divides us. He's not in denial about the division, but he wants us to focus on the journey. So another thing Al shared with us is that he's really a closet Pentecostal. The problem, Al, now I am going to look at you. The problem with you being a closet Pentecostal is you sit in the front row. No closets in the front row. So, I don't know if Al goes out of his way to do this, but another thing Al does, I keep looking at the clock. Another thing Al does is he regularly uses evangelical buzzwords and ideas. And what I think he's trying to do is show us that all these different camps relate to our history. Whether we want to embrace it or whether we're proud of it or not, Al's going to deal with that. He's going to unpack that stuff. And some of that stuff's kind of heavy. It's hard to carry around. So we need to unpack it so we don't necessarily take stuff we don't need on the trail. Now, Al knows all the different camps that Christians live in. Now, the problem, Al, is you're in San Francisco. In San Francisco, people don't believe in closets, number one. But most Christians in San Francisco, we don't have the energy to keep all those camps straight. If I meet a Christian at work, it's like fist bump, maybe do some Jeremy Wong dance moves. We're just blessed to be in the presence of another believer. We may never bother to find out which denomination they're from. Episcopalian, Church of God in Christ, Roman Catholic. We don't care. It's a Christian. But Al has to care. Al's trying to sell himself to the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And they have distinctives. So I was going to do a little riff on that, but I'm going to cut that part out. So that's some of what we know about Al. Now, what we need to remember is Al is no good as a pastor if Janice isn't on the same page. So one of Western Christianity's dirty little secrets, it has many, but one of them is that it's way harder to be the spouse of a pastor than it is to be a pastor. Right, Judy? Right, Norm? Lenny? Alan? It is way harder to be when you're the spouse of a pastor, you go through all the stuff they go through, only you don't get to stand up the next Sunday and set people straight. Get a little of your own back. You have to it's a hard gig. It's a really, really hard gig. So my question to us is, are we going to take care of Janice? Because one of the things we know about Janice, aside from the fact that she likes a guy with big hair, one of the things we know about Janice is she's a pastor too. Whenever she's here, she moves chairs, she serves, and then, I don't know if you've noticed this, anytime there's any little social gathering or any little space, you will find Janice sitting and listening to somebody from our congregation. That's who she is. She's a pastor. Now, remember what came to mind when I said the word pastor? This is your homework. Sometime this week, pull that out. Write it down on a piece of paper and write, or maybe you don't have to do that. Think about what that means to you. Look at it, turn it around. Are we expecting Al to be just like some other pastor we know? For some of us, the word pastor doesn't conjure up good images, but a broken one. Are we looking at Al through a skewed lens? For others, the word pastor is very, very positive, even powerful connotations. But those images are tied to somebody who's not Al. Al is Al. God created Al the way he is. We get to learn about him and embrace him. A couple more things about Al. He's not afraid to show weakness. He's not embarrassed. He admits he had to call 911 because he was lost. On a hike in the East Bay Hills where there's no trees. All you got to do, Al, is look. Oh. The Golden Gate Bridge, Carquinez Straits. At least his bars on his cell phone, eventually. Al admits that one of the reasons he has affinity for us is because he's gone through hard times. Al has gone through such hard times, and I didn't find this in my notes, so hopefully I'm not misquoting you. My understanding is at one point Al said he would never again be a pastor. Is that true? There he is. Now, Al does keep boundaries. He told us that he had that experience, but he didn't tell us the story, did he? Why? Because he doesn't want to smack talk anybody. He wanted us to know that he's broken too. And that he's willing to have God change his plans around a little bit. We know Al understands what it's like to go through a ringer. Al's been down, but Al's ready to move on, and he wants us to go with him. Al wants to be our pastor. Let's let him do that. This is the most exciting part.